Well, howdy there. Nice to see you all again out there in Internet land. And this is the Mad Professor, Dr. John Cross, talking to you from Iraq. And in the background, you can probably hear one of our neighborhood generators because after 20 years of invasion, Iraq still does not have a viable electricity grid. But let's not talk about Iraq right now because the problems here in Iraq are relatively minor compared to what's happening back home in the good old US of A. So I just actually just wanted to talk a little bit about tariff policy. I don't want to get stuck on all this current politics. I want to talk about race relations in the US. I want to talk about nature of our history, nature of our constitution. But in between me being lazy and the current news just blowing up in our face. Um, well, what can we do? And before I go on, let me just give a heads up. Sorry, a hand. A thanks to my assistants here. We got Bella here. Bella, say hi. Bella is my assistant on loan, and here's Shaggy. He's always ready to help out, especially if some somebody comes trying to bother me. He, like sheep in wolf's clothing, maybe. I don't know. We get those around here. So, anyway, so Trump has announced these massive tariffs 54% for China, 20% for an island of penguins, and a couple other uninhabited islands, 30% for Europe. I don't know what. Um, and of course, nothing for Russia because Russia. Why would we put a tariff on Russia, right? I mean, they got caviar, they got vodka. These are vital ingredients. So, but what's really interesting about this tariff policy that Trump announced is the bizarreness of these tariffs. So, they put together a series of charts that showed that other countries were being incredibly unfair and had massive tariffs on the United States. 50%, 100%, 80%, 70% tariffs that they were levying against the United States. Now, everybody's kind of like, what the heck is he talking about? Europe has a tariff of 1 or 2% on US goods. China does have tariffs on goods because they've been reciprocating against the tariffs that Trump put on them back when he was in his first incarnation as uh, Orange Doofus in the White House. Um, uh, but so nobody can figure out where are these numbers. It just seems like he was making up numbers. Well, what it seems he was doing, if I can explain this in a fairly simple way, it was he wasn't looking at the tariffs. He was looking at the trade balance, right? So let's say, just for example, let's say with the UK, we sell $100 billion of goods every year to the UK, and they sell $200 billion of goods to the United States. So that is an imbalance, right? They have $200 billion of our money going to them, and only $100 billion coming back. So what Trump somehow figured out is this is a 50% imbalance. So that means it's a 50% tariff. Okay. So he apparently still does not understand what a tariff is a tax that a country puts on goods coming into that country from a foreign country, right? And then that tax is paid by the import company, whoever's importing those goods. So let's say it's Walmart, for example, importing lawn chairs from China, right? And they import $1 million of lawn chairs. And if you put a 25% tariff on that, then the importer has to pay to the US government $250,000 in tax, right? Now they have to pay this when they receive the goods. So the goods will arrive, let's say, in a port in Los Angeles. It will be unloaded into a what they call a bonded warehouse, which means a secure place so nobody can get at it, right? Until they've paid the tax, and then the customs, they collect the tax, U.S. Customs, and then they say, okay, now you can pick up your goods, right? Now, what does Walmart do after paying that? They're just going to pocket. I mean, they're just going to pay that $250,000 out of their revenues? No, because their profit margin is probably, maybe after all their expenses, maybe 5-10%, right? So that's maybe $100,000 max. So they're not going to go and lose $150,000. Either they will pass that cost along to the consumer. So now the consumer, instead of paying $100 for a deck chair, will pay $125 if they're lucky for a deck chair, right? Or they simply won't pick up the goods. They'll just let them sit there in the warehouse, or maybe be seized by the customs, and the customs will then, I don't know, return it to China, or maybe sell it at an auction or whatever. Um, so the point is, when you have a trade imbalance, that's not a tax. So let me just give you an example, right? Everybody has a job, right? You go to your job, you collect a salary, right? Then you take your salary, you go to a store, and you buy the goods you need to live, right? So let's assume you're like a country, right? So you go out and you earn, let's say, to make it simple, $100,000 a year doing, I don't know what, IT management, whatever, we'll just call it 100,000, right? Then that is your income, right? Then you're going to go to the store and you're going to buy goods at the store, right? So the way Trump would see it, he would say, well, hold it. You have a positive trade balance of $100,000 with your employer, right? Let's say you work for General Motors, right? And then you have a negative $100,000 trade balance with your store. Let's say Walmart. You buy everything at Walmart, let's say, to make it simple, right? So Trump is saying, okay, so you have a negative trade balance with Walmart. You should then tax that, right? Let's put a tax on your negative trade balance with Walmart, right? So we're going to put a 50% tax on that, right? And you say, well, hold it here. I'm getting $100,000, and I'm already paying tax on that because we call that income tax. But let's skip that even for right now, right? And then you go to Walmart, and then Trump is saying, "Oh, you have a negative trade balance with Walmart, so we're going to hit a 50% or whatever tax on that, right?" And there they go. There's some probably a critic out the door. So they're gonna put a tax on that. Who pays that tax? Well, you're gonna pay that tax. So now instead of $100,000, you have to go into Walmart and say, well, I can only afford $50,000 because I'm paying a 50. Okay, do you see how ridiculous that is? Right? When you put the logic that way, right? So he's claiming that because we have a trade deficit with China and Europe and all these other places, that means they're unfair and they have high tariffs or other barriers. Now there are other barriers. There are other things. For example, Europe has high standards for food, right? So U.S. food producers can't sell a lot of their products in Europe because, frankly, U.S. standards for food are so low, right? The European countries won't accept it, right? It's like, this beef that we sell in the U.S. You've heard, right, all the time how there's a recall on beef, a recall on broccoli. That's because we have very low standards in the U.S., right? So, we don't have enough inspectors. We don't have enough people going out and checking these things. Now we have even less because, Elon Musk doggy department has been going around slashing inspectors and slashing everybody who does this kind of stuff. So what happens is our quality is so low, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to force Europe to buy our goods even though they don't meet their quality standards? right? How would Americans feel if some other country said, like Russia came to us and said, "You must buy our crappy food because otherwise we're gonna do something to you"? No. Every country has the right to maintain their standards as long as they apply the same standards to the imported food that they're applying to local food, right? Like it would, sometimes it does happen that countries use, sneaky ways of putting barriers on things, and the United States is one of the worst in doing this, right? You ever tried to you go to Mexico and you try to buy vegetables and bring them back in the U.S.? They could put you in jail for that. I remember one time I came back with vegetables from Mexico, and the border agent says, "What are you bringing in?" I said, "Well, I don't know. My wife bought a bunch of vegetables. I don't know what's there. You're free to go take a look." I gave her the right to search my car for whatever vegetables are there. She comes back. She's like, "This asparagus is not allowed. It's illegal. This cucumber is burnt, and the tomatoes are not." It's like, and I said, "Well, lady, I'm not hiding anything. I let you look." And she's like, this has a street value of $16. It's like 16. I was like, lady, throw them away if you don't want them. But what I'm saying is, we put barriers on a lot of Mexican produce simply because we don't want to have them in the country competing with local farmers. That's why you can never bring in things like oranges, because Florida and California orange producers tell the administration, and it's not just Trump. This is a lot of different administrations. Anyway, the point is, countries do this. A lot of it is petty, right? And they kind of get away with it because it's on a small thing here or there. But what Trump is alleging is this massive thing. I mean, here's the fact: the reason we have a negative trade balance with most countries is because, simply put, we are buying more of their stuff because the dollar is overvalued, right? That means it is cheaper for us to take our dollars, go abroad, and buy stuff abroad, right? The dollar is too powerful. Why is the dollar too powerful? Because it's the universal currency, right? Everybody in the world uses dollars, right? So that increases the value of the dollar. Now that is good for us. It means we can buy more stuff, right? And it's cheaper for us to buy stuff, right? Now, what does a trade balance mean at the end of the day? Who knows? Economists have been debate is a negative trade balance a good thing or a bad thing, right? Traditional economists would say it's a bad thing because it means we're consuming more than we produce, and that has to, there has to be a bill somewhere, right? Other people say no, it just means that we're consuming we're at the high end, right? We're like rich people everywhere, right? Rich people everywhere consume more than they produce. They don't produce diddly squat, but they can consume because they got money in the bank. And what is money in the bank? It's reputation, right? If you have a good reputation, you get stuff cheaper. You get loans. You get discounts, right? Because people want you coming back, right? To do business with you, right? So that's why rich people always have an advantage. They have a good reputation. Oh, that money, that guy's good for it. He can spend all he wants. He can ring up as much money as he wants. We don't care. Give him as much credit as he wants, right? Because he's rich. We want his business. Well, that's the United States. We're rich. That's why we have a negative trade balance. We consume more than we produce because we're rich, right? But this is the rub, right? Trump does not have that mentality. He's a guy who's rich, but he thinks he's poor, right? Trump thinks every trade transaction is a negative sum. He thinks he always has to beat the other guy. All of his life, He has tried to cheat and chisel, right? Every tradesman, he'll get a tradesman. Oh, okay, we'll do $100,000 if you remodel my living room, right, and put gold plating on my toilets, right? And then when the guy's finished, he'll be like, well, I didn't like the way you did it, so I'm going to only pay you half, right? And that's the way he's always operated, by chiseling, by cheating the other guy, right? So he thinks if he's not cheating somebody else, they must be cheating him. Because when you have that that peasant mentality, I call it a peasant mentality because it's this guy who only thinks in zero sum, right? You only like for him, resources are always limited; they're finite, right? So the less he has, the more somebody else has, right? If they have more than me, then right? See, he has a poor man's mentality, right? That's why he has to have all this gold and glitter all over the place, right? But this is the thing at the end of the day, right? He has, throughout his business history, destroyed every trade relationship he ever had with his business partners, with his contractors, with the businesses he went bankrupt, right? He forced into bankruptcy, right? Um, that's the way he thinks about the world. So he's going to destroy our reputation, right? He's going to destroy our reputation because he's going to try to cheat other people, right? Because he thinks they're cheating him. So, the paradox of this type of behavior is that it ultimately requires you constantly expand the con, right? So when you have a con game, like a Ponzi scheme, the only way to keep it going is to keep expanding it, right? So Trump started small with these mini Ponzi schemes in Manhattan, and then he went into the casino business. And every time he'd come in with a big splash, look at me, I'm the big spender. In reality, he was just a very small poor man, right? And of course they all failed, but every time he would fail, he would somehow make it look like he had succeeded, right? So he would keep the illusion, and then he would expand it. Then he went to Russia, right? That's how he got sucked into the Russian orbit, right? This presidency itself, his initial presidency, was just a continuation of the Ponzi scheme, and now, of course, he's taken it to a level that boggles the mind. Now it works as long as he can keep the con going. It will work, right? Of course, at some point he'll hit a brick wall. He will, right? When? Who knows? I thought he hit the brick wall back when he accused McCain of being a coward, right? Back when he insulted military veterans, I was like, there's no way the Republican Party is going to take this. No, they did. They swallowed it whole, right? I thought he would crash when COVID happened, and he was completely incapable of controlling it. And he lost the election in 2020, right? I thought, okay, we survived, but he's kept it going. He kept the lie, he kept the con going. He stayed just one micro step ahead of all these criminal cases and civil case. He kept it. He was able to, as long as he can keep going, as long as he can keep the con going. Of course, con one hopes, right, has to eventually end. I guess it's possible somebody can keep their con going until they die. Um, there are examples of cons that have become institutions, so I'm not going to even get into that. So my assistants have all abandoned me. I think they're trying to find places to pee in the kitchen. So with that, I'll say good night. If you've lasted this long, please like, share, What's that thing? You could press the subscribe button or something. So far, I've got 3 followers, maybe 4. We'll see how it goes. You have a great night, and let's hope the economy. Well, the economy is going to collapse, or not collapse. We're gonna go through a recession. They're saying there's a 50% chance. I think they're saying 50% because most economists are still assuming that this whole tariff thing is just a bluff, that he won't go through with it. And that's possible. So if he doesn't go through with it, I would say yes, we have a 50% chance of recession. If he goes through with it, you're looking at a full-on recession, if not a full-blown depression, because you cannot screw up the world trade system in that way. All right. Now, whether the whole world is involved, I mean, it's possible. The rest of the world still has GATT. We still have World Trade Organizations, the WTO, the GATT, the International Bank. Of course, the U.S. has a lot of influence in those things. But if the rest of the world is smart, they will simply carve out the United States, and they will try to create trade patterns around the United States. And this is feasible because it isn't like 20, 30 years ago when the US dominated 30, 40% of world trade, right? Now you've got China, you've got India, you've got the EU. Um, there's a strong possibility obviously they will suffer from this because the U.S. was a big chunk of it. It still is a big chunk of world trade. But if these tariffs go through, that's not going to be true, and basically you're going to be creating a hole around the United States, somewhat similar to what was happening to Germany and Japan in the 1930s, right, when they were being isolated financially by the rest of the world. And they chose at that time to fight. I don't know what Trump will decide. Maybe he'll decide or somehow get the U.S. caught up in some paranoid delusion of his that he's being attacked improperly by all these other countries. He needs to become a dictator. He needs to start invading other countries. Canada after all, isn't Canada just another state? They're just like us. They want to be like us, just like Austria really wanted to be part of the greater Germany. No, they didn't, but that's what Hitler said. And he managed to convince enough people so they didn't even say boo when he invaded. But I don't think that's going to happen today. I don't think Americans are going to go along with it. At least, good night and God bless.